You are 96% more likely to achieve a goal when you have an accountability partner.
Get to know book writing expert, Stacy Ennis.
And I spent a big portion of my career working in the magazine world. I helped found a regional magazine when I was living in Idaho, kind of between the Vietnam and grad school. And then eventually I ended up ghostwriting for a Nobel Prize winner in medicine for about 4 years. And I ran Sam's Club magazine. So they had a healthy living magazine that had about 11 million readers. And I was executive editor of that publication. The way I've been thinking about this recently that feels very true to me is that when I don't show up for my goals that I know are really important to me, it erodes my self-trust. People stop themselves before they even get started because they think that they need perfect conditions.
Well, even hearing you say this out loud is like, why have I not been spending 15 minutes a day writing my book?
Welcome to the Grit Blueprint Podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie Couch. This podcast is about branding, building, and business. It also highlights the grit that it takes to be successful in business and in life. Let's get started.
Welcome to the Grit Blueprint Podcast with Stephanie Couch. Today, I have a guest who I met a few years ago through a course that I took of hers, Stacy Ennis. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Stephanie. I'm so excited about our conversation.
Me too. We actually met before we met because I was on a Boise State University conference and I saw a class that you did on book writing and authorship and how you can build your business and your brand around that. And then I reached out to you actually after I had seen another article that you'd written on Medium. And I was like, you know what? This is probably a sign. This was a random, just thing that I happened to see on my feed. And I went in and read the article and I reached out to you and took your course and it was amazing. I learned so much and also met some really cool people through that and some clients. So I want to talk to you about your journey, who you are, and really hone in on how you help other people become authors, which is really what you are absolutely world-class at. So welcome to the podcast, and I want to start with you diving into a little bit about you and your backstory.
Well, I didn't know about the Boise State connection. That's really interesting.
Yes.
And I know exactly what you're talking about. I also am a Boise State alum, so I got my bachelor's at Boise State. It's a good place to start with our background. My master's at the University of Cincinnati. But in the kind of interim of that, my husband and I moved, while we were dating at the time, moved to the Caribbean, and then we moved to Vietnam, came back and got my master's. And I spent a big portion of my career working in magazine world. And I helped found a regional magazine when I was living in Idaho, kind of between the Vietnam and grad school. And then eventually I ended up ghostwriting for a Nobel Prize winner in medicine for about 4 years. And I ran Sam's Club magazine. So they had a healthy living magazine that had about 11 million readers. And I was executive editor of the publication.
Wow.
And I loved working in magazines, I think partially because you do the work and then get to hold the work in your hands pretty quickly. It's, we were publishing every 2 months. So every 2 months I would get an actual magazine that I could see that had my name on it. That was really, really cool. And then from the magazine world, and I'm happy to dig in anywhere, but I'll give you pretty high level to start. I eventually transitioned into books and started, I think part of that was when I was working with the Nobel Prize winner, I wrote a book as part of that whole kind of ghostwriting situation. And then I started working with more authors, ghostwriting more books. I was also a book editor for a long period of time before that as I was working with the magazine. And then out of ghostwriting, then eventually started coaching. So this is like a 15-year span. And today I live in Portugal. We lived before this with our kids in Thailand, and I get to work with the world's greatest humans on meaningful, impactful, world-changing books as a book coach. So it's like the coolest work ever. And I get to work with people like you. And so some of the people that you mentioned, it's really people that are putting good into the world and care deeply and are actually changing things. And I get to be a conduit for that. I just think it's the coolest thing in the world.
That's awesome. So a few things I want to hit on. First of all, your journey is really cool because you've done a lot of different things, You've also lived a lot of different places, which I want to touch on a little deeper and ask you a little bit about that, about living somewhere else in a different country and having your family there. And you've gotten to experience so many cool things in your life. And then the other thing is being able to do something you love and also help other people do that same thing, which I found a lot of great joy in myself, is, not just being able to be good at something yourself, like writing, but then helping other people figure out their gifts and how to show that to the world. And that's a really cool thing, to be able to do the thing you love for a living and get paid for it and live where you want to live. A lot of people don't think about that as an option. I found in my life, we all have our choices of how we live our life and how we show up. Sometimes we get caught in this trap of, this is what I should do. This is what my family wants me to do. This is what has always been done. And you've really made that choice to go do what you want in your life and live the way that you want, and your husband and your family are choosing that. Tell me a little bit about that spirit in you that has made you be able to go out and brave some of what would say like the wild change of, you don't know what it's going to be like and you're not sure how it's going to work out. Tell me about that.
Well, I think that the spark of that started with reading as a kid. And growing up, I always told my mom that I was moving to New York as soon as I was 18. I'm from Idaho, from Boise, nothing like New York there. And that was from reading The Babysitter's Club. I loved that series. And there was a character named Stacy, and she went to New York. There was this whole special what do they call it? Like a super special where she goes on this big trip to New York.
Yes.
And I think books just gave me this platform from which I could imagine different futures for myself. So I think that was a huge initial period of it, or initial kind of formation. But then the other thing that happened, that I'm grateful that I have my husband in general, but I'm grateful that I met him when I did, because I was about a year from finishing my undergrad, and it's kind of a funny story. I won't go into too much detail, but when we met, he'd just come back from that like traditional college kid backpacking trip in Asia. So it was like weeks, and it was very life-changing, whatever. So when we met, we fell in love. It was very dramatic because he was planning to go back to Asia, and he was a year ahead of me in his undergrad. And, he's going to leave, very dramatic. And then it was a real love. And he decided that he would wait and stay with me. And I had to agree to move with him after I finished my undergrad. And I think I was really fortunate that at that age, I was 23 when we moved to the Caribbean. I kind of was like really thrust into a very different world at a very formative age. And I think that taught me that actually, like, you can do almost anything. I mean, moving from Boise, Idaho to Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic, and I have so many crazy stories I could tell you of what I experienced there. And then that was not the first time that I had moved. I have actually all of the places that we've moved around the world, I had never visited before we went there. So we have a history of just moving places without doing a visit, including Portugal. I'd never even been to Europe when we moved here. One of the things that I have learned through all these experiences is that we make things much bigger in our heads than they actually are when you go to do it. And especially living in all of these different countries and doing a lot of kind of big and crazy things throughout my professional life, my personal life. What I always think is interesting is when I get to that place, whatever it is, whether it's, doing a TEDx talk, or it's moving to a new country, or it's like scaling my business, whatever it is, when I get to the point that I've been working toward and I lift my head up and look around, I'm like, oh, there's tons of people that are doing this. It's not that big of a deal. And so just keeping that attitude of a thing, like, just because you make it something in your head doesn't make it actually really as big as it truly is. And that we are adaptable, and that we can also make a different choice at any point. So if something doesn't work out, when we moved to Thailand, it was like a hot mess disaster. And we just said, oh, this didn't work. Okay, what are we going to do next? Let's move to Portugal. And we've been here for 5 years now.
I love that. The adventurous side of you is so fun. And I have that same side. And my husband actually does too. We haven't moved out of the country yet, but we've definitely moved a lot. I think 8 times in 6 years now. A lot of it's been for jobs. A lot of it's been for just places we want to live, and I think that's exciting to know that you can just do anything that you want to do, like you said, if you just decide. And there might be hardships or failures or whatever it is. And if you're okay with that up front and hey, we're going to make it through either way, you can do anything you want. So I love that. And the spirit of entrepreneurship is basically that whole idea, because if you don't believe that, then you'll never make it. It's so hard if you don't have that mindset to feel like you can get through hard times, because you'll have struggles for sure in any part of life, but especially starting a business. One thing I wanted to ask you about a little bit more is, how do you deal with when you go set out to do something that seems like a very long process? Maybe the book writing process in itself, it can be very arduous to people, thinking about, I have to sit down and, pen 60,000 words or whatever people think. I don't even know that they have a count in their head, but they think they have to do this huge thing and it's going to take years. And in my mind, I think people have this romanticized view of like sitting by Walden Pond, scribing out with a quill pen. I know in my head, when I think about writing a book, it's like by water for sure. It's, in a journal with a handwritten, format. But how do you tell people to look at something like that? It is a big journey in bite-sized chunks where they can see that they can actually get to the finish line. Because I know with your book writing class, that is a big part of it, is breaking it down into tolerable segments and having a process. So tell me a little bit more about that and how you work with people.
I imagine there's a lot of parallels between this and brand building. It starts with vision, right? And having clarity of the thing that you want to do in the world, actually. To me, that's bigger than the book, because when I'm helping people think through that right book for right now, I'm helping them understand where they are today, which is point A, and where they want to go in the future, which is point B. And then how is this book going to be a catalyst for them to get there? So that's where we start. We start with that big vision. That's really important, because it's also something that can anchor you as things get hard. As you get in any long process, you need something that you are working towards, something that's powerful and motivating for you. So that's where we start first. And then we work on, I recommend creating a plan. So you have a high-level project plan, and it's like anything else, right? High-level vision, plan, breaking that down into milestones that you can accomplish along the way in the book writing process. The way that I think through this in the first draft stage is ideation, outlining, writing, and editing. So we break those down, and then further breaking those down into smaller steps that you're building on. So from a project planning standpoint, I can certainly dig in more there, but I think there's also a mindset to this. One is that people stop themselves before they even get started because they think that they need perfect conditions. They need the Walden Pond, or they need multiple hours every day. And most of us are never going to have that. Or if we do, it's only going to be for a pretty limited window of time, maybe a couple weeks. And if we can take a retreat like we think we need, we're not actually building momentum before we go on that retreat. So the retreat's not even used as well as it could be. So what I'm often helping people do instead is to focus on consistency and frequency. And that's way more important than the amount of time that you're sitting down to do something. I had somebody write me on my email list a while ago that said, they sent me a message. I think I send out twice a week emails. And one of them is always a really reflective, thoughtful piece. And I'd written something about this topic. And he wrote me and he said, I've been trying for years to write this book, but I just don't have 2 hours a day. And I wrote him back and I said, do you have 10 minutes? Can we lower the bar for yourself? So can you start with 10 minutes? Can you start with sitting down at 10 minutes a day? And when you get there, can you increase that a little bit? And when you get there, can you increase that a little bit? Maybe he doesn't ever get to 2 hours, but maybe he gets to 30 minutes a day. And a few weeks went by and he wrote me back and he said, I can't believe it. It's like gushing out of me now. Just removing this barrier that I had in my mind that I had to have this perfect thing set has enabled me to just sit down and create. And that's also, if you think about how our brains are wired, it's not easy for us to sit and focus for a couple hours at a time. And writing is a skill that needs to be honed and developed over time. So we need to be easy on ourselves with writing, with anything like it, any big thing, to ease into it and to grow our consistency at that time. But it is really important that you are showing up regularly and consistently along the way. That's, I think, the vision, the plan, and that consistency is everything. And then another little layer to that I would add is accountability. I ran into some research published by a professional group that I'm not remembering the name of the other day. And it said that you are 96% more likely to achieve a goal when you have an accountability partner.
Yeah, couldn't agree with that more.
You feel that, right? Like, I know that's true for me. Yeah. If I have accountability, I am many times more likely to achieve my goals.
Well, even hearing you say this out loud, it's like, why have I not been spending 15 minutes a day writing my book? My problem, more than the time and the consistency, that is obviously an issue, is I am not sure exactly what topic, because when I started your class 2.5 years ago, I was in a really, really different spot in my life than I am now, and I had an idea. And then that very quickly shifted, and I was like, well, now maybe it's this, and now it's even different. So it's like, I just got to put a stake on the moon and say, this is what it is now. And I think also that perfectionism of knowing that this is your first book. Like, I've always thought I will probably write more than one book in my life, because I actually really enjoy writing. I've gotten really into copywriting now. So I have been doing a lot of writing over the last 2 years, and I've been doing a lot of thought leadership and things like that on LinkedIn. And that's a whole different type of thing, because copywriting is very different than long form writing, but it's still storytelling and it's still sharing your ideas. And for me, it's like, Stephanie, just write a book about the things you're doing right now and even your journey of building this business. And then in 2 years or 5 years, write the next book about whatever it is. It doesn't even have to be correlated in any way. And I think that's myself talking to me, but also with my brand building clients, it's the same fear. It's like, well, what if I start posting on LinkedIn today and in 6 months, I want to talk about something else? And you think that someone's going to really care about that more than they are. I mean, we care about what we're doing a lot more than anyone else. And I think that's the thing, is with anything, you have to just start. The non-perfection mindset is huge, especially for me. And a lot of women struggle with perfectionism. It's been proven. I think men have some of that too, but women really usually struggle with it more. And it's about getting started and knowing that you may not be the best writer ever the first page you put on the paper. Again, that romantic idea of like scribing, the world's best novel. I mean, It's because I'm a high achiever and a perfectionist. It's like a toxic combo of, it can be a toxic stop sign, really is what it can be, of you can't get anywhere because you're worried about it not being like the best seller that's ever been out in the world that sells 17 million copies. Like, I want to write Atomic Habits. Why can't I just do that?
I know there's so much tied to that. And then I think the other layer to that I would add, that I hear a lot from my clients, is, yeah, maybe the interest in writing will change, but then there's also, but in 6 months, a year, 2 years, I'll be more qualified to write on this. So there's like this never ending future bar that they're trying to hit. Yeah. And I really encourage people to think about, when you read something meaningful, whether it's a blog post or a LinkedIn post, maybe that you wrote, Stephanie, or a book, or you listen to a podcast, it's not usually somebody that's 20 years ahead of you. It's somebody that's maybe a few steps ahead. And so when I'm helping people craft their books, there's balance of crafting a book that is where you are now and capturing that expertise for that person. Oftentimes it's somebody that's a few steps behind you. But then we're also crafting something that will position you to the future of where you want to go. So we're holding both of those together as we're working on ideation. I would think for you, Stephanie, I'm just knowing that you have access to the education that's part of the program. And in fact, I gifted you recently the newer version of it just a couple months ago. Yeah. You could easily go back through the ideation workshop that's in there, right? It takes 2 hours. Yeah.
I'll take the challenge, Stacy. I hear you, and I'll take the challenge. I really want to do this, and I know it's important to me and personally, but also for a business, it would be great. I do a lot of speaking. It would be awesome to have a book to go with that. Like I'm speaking 3 or 4 times in the next few weeks, and I would love to have that on top of the services that I can provide people. So it is a complementary thing. And that's I think a good segue to let's talk a little bit about how you've seen people use a book as a business and branding tool to position themselves as a leader in their space, an expert in their space. And where do you give someone like me that maybe already has a brand or someone that's just starting out advice of how to use that tool to really leverage that?
Well, I think we can point to some obvious stuff that we know. One is when you've written a book, you're the person that wrote the book on the thing. And so there's this obvious elevation of and just kind of a natural elevation, I should say, of your overall platform becoming an author. And even I have seen my clients leverage that author status well before the publication date. So sharing behind the scenes of their process and taking people on that journey with them. They're already growing their businesses and their brands simply through working that into their brand storytelling. So that's huge. Yeah. Maybe they're doing workshops right now and they aspire to be on the keynote stage. And it's not a 100% requirement that you have to have a book to get on a keynote stage, but it certainly helps open some doors. It's a great way to win over an opportunity by including books as part of your speaker fee. There's all these things that you can do. And events love to give gifts. If you're including your book and attendees are getting that, it's a huge bonus. They love that. So there's the obvious stuff, the elevation of your brand, of your platform, the doors it opens. But then there's these other pieces to it that I don't think people talk about or think about very often. And actually, it's all internal, most of it. And especially when we're talking about branding and we're talking about business development and we're talking about personal growth, I think that the process and journey of writing a book I have yet to have somebody share a better way of connecting with oneself or understanding oneself or deepening one's own thoughts, which is thought leadership, right? Like to be a thought leader, you must be a thinker and you must know how to articulate those thoughts clearly. And so going through the process of writing a book is the deepest introspective journey that, other than maybe like transcendental meditation or something, it's the deepest process. But even with meditation, you're not then offering that out. So you don't then have to take that and communicate it with other people. And so there's not just the actual writing of the book, there's all of this planning and ideation that goes on ahead of it. And then you create the thing and you grow and you have new ideas and you have new language and oftentimes new programs will arise out of it.
Yeah.
Or, new ways of working with clients, new frameworks. But there's also this piece of you that shows up so much clearer, really deeply understanding yourself and your mission and your message and how you articulate that. It is really, really powerful and truly one of the best ways, I think, that you can grow your business, grow your brand, and show up in a new, bigger, kind of next level capacity.
The way you've grown your brand with this thought leadership around authorship, and then what you've also done, you have a best-selling book and it's called Growing Influence. And that influence piece is, I think, what I see when I think about authorship, when I think about, posting on social media, whatever medium we use. It's really about helping people see us, and then how we are visible, then we can help others. And I love how you do that, especially with people who are trying to do something big in the world. You really focus in on those types of people. And I think that's who comes to you naturally. And you do that with such grace. So I loved working with you, and I want to work with you more in the future when I write this book that I'm going to write, or books. And I think that is something that a lot of people listening to this are like, okay, I'm fired up. She's inspired me. I'm going to go get my pen and pencil and start thinking about what I want to write. So how do you work with people? Because we've talked a little bit. I did a course with you that was a very intense, 10 weeks, I think, at the time, 10 weeks. And we did that together in a group cohort. And then I got some time, one-on-one with different people. We broke out sessions. We did all these different things. But talk about what you offer now, because I know you have some new things. And then for free content, also, where can people connect with you and find you?
So our program that we did together, which I loved so much the intensity of that program and our like really deep connected short period of time. But what I found in that process was that I get the most joy, and I think I serve people the best when I get to stay with them from idea to first draft, and then also give them the coaching and support they need to get organized around those next steps. And so I used to run a 10-week program. I did that for a couple of years. And then about, I think 2.5 or 2 years ago, decided to expand it to a 6-month program. So it mirrors my private coaching. I work with people one-on-one, but I wanted to basically bring the one-on-one to a group format. And it's interesting when I think about that, in the beginning when I launched the program back in, I think it was early 2020, I had this idea that people wouldn't want to do a group for 6 months. I just had this in my mind that people weren't going to want to do that. And what's funny is now having run a few cohorts of the 6 months, I see how supported people are and how much they need that long-term accountability. And it's been truly I feel 15 years in business now, I feel like I'm really living into this really cool phase of getting to deeply connect with people and support them in this 6-month cohort. So that's one of the ways that people can work with me. It's called idea to draft. We literally go from idea to draft, and I also help them understand the next steps. I work also with people in one-on-one coaching, and then I have an author community as well, which is really designed to serve people as they're finishing or after that first step. So we have monthly education around topics like public speaking. We did one last month on using a podcast to grow your business, which is very meta. We're here on a podcast right now. I do monthly office hours, and we just connect as a community. In fact, today I'm joining a coffee chat. So we're just connecting and spending time together. And it's a really cool community because they're all people like you, Stephanie. They're high achievers, they're driven. And the core connection point with all of the people that I work with is that they're putting good into the world. So it's this beautiful group. This is what I love about, this from your group that you were in. They're just the world's coolest people, just doing the greatest stuff. It's amazing.
Yeah, and I'm sure for you, looking back and seeing all these books come into the world, I see you post, I think Joel from our group posted his book a few weeks ago that he had launched it into the world. And so seeing that product come, it's amazing for them, but also for you, kind of like a proud coach mother moment. And then also seeing how that then rocket ships their next steps to leverage their career, their business, their personal life, whatever it is that it grows for them, probably all of the above. It's really awesome to watch your clients thrive. And I have some people that I'm working with right now. They already have that same thing, that good they're doing in the world. They're amazing at whatever they're trying to do in their expertise, but they just need help branding themselves to let the world see who they really are and show the world in a way that they aren't maybe comfortable because they don't feel like they should show themselves that much. Well, maybe do I really need this, social media every single day? And it's well, if you don't see someone for 2 weeks on social media, do you think about them often? No, we have to be seen. And that's the thing, is that people get really nervous about that. And I think allowing your gift to help their gift is a powerful thing. And we hopefully are both doing that for a lot of people. I know you are. And it's fun to be able to do that every single day. One thing that I want to talk through that people are always asking me is, how do you help your book be seen? How do you get your message out there once you launch, once this thing is actually in the world? It's a plan that you probably need to have. And a lot of people, they're writers now, once they've worked with you. They are experts in whatever field they were in, but they are probably not marketers or salespeople by trade. And they're most likely not social media. I always hear the word influencers. People tell me that a lot. I don't want to be an influencer. It's well, don't you want to influence people to help get your message out into the world, to do whatever you're trying to do? I think they have a negative connotation because they don't want to be dancing on TikTok all day, maybe. But what are your thoughts on that? And I have some thoughts too, but I'm curious to hear how you've seen people really do that well. to position themselves and actually grow their book sales and their book influence once they launch it into the world.
Okay, I will get into the practical stuff in a moment, but I want to talk about what you said about, not wanting to be an influencer, quote unquote. And it's really interesting because just earlier today, I had a conversation with somebody about this. And I've noticed this journey that people go on when they have a dream, a vision of something they want to do in the world. Like they have a purpose that they want to live into, and they know that it is burning in them. They are deeply committed to it, but there is so much fear of being seen. And I really understand that. I remember many years back, I knew I needed to start being on video, and I was so scared to just record one video. And I worked all up about it and, had everything set up the right way, and finally recorded this thing and put it on YouTube, and really just started taking those first steps of being seen. I think it's natural, it's biological that we don't feel safe when we're exposed. And so I just want to acknowledge that for people that are feeling that, and especially for people that are deep thinkers, authors. By nature of being an author, you are a deep thinker. You have to be to write a book. And I think also you're in this little cozy cocoon, especially in my program, where it's so gentle and we're together and it's connected and it's cozy. And then we have to start thinking about this journey outward to share with other people. And that can be really, really scary for people. So and I know that you have all kinds of different things that you do to help people with that process, but I just want to first of all, acknowledge that. I don't know if you want to add anything to that before I get into the practical stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put a story that, again, happened to me this week with a client. So she is a former CEO of a huge business. She grew it literally from nothing, her and her husband, and she has sold it to her employees recently, and she's now on the board. And she's incredible, in every sense of the word. She's brilliant. She's a great speaker. She does keynotes all over the place. That's really what I'm helping her with. It's just, her keynote speaking brand now. And so we got on Riverside to do some recording for content. And she's like, I don't understand. I don't like to be on video. And I'm like, well, this is pretty normal. I mean, it's like you just said, I feel like everybody, even me, sometimes I'm like, my setup's not perfect. My camera's not good. The edits aren't, I want it to be like Mr. Beast. I mean, that's just how I am about everything, unfortunately. And fortunately, it's a good and a bad thing. But I asked her, I said, what is the difference between this and when you're on stage in front of 600 people? And she said, I don't know. And I said, I think it's because you're talking to no one. And I think that that's what it is for most people. It's like you're, even on this side where we're talking to each other, it's so much easier than when you're just recording by yourself on Riverside or just on your iPhone or whatever you're doing. I think that it's because you're talking to no one. And so that connection, that engagement, that kind of lights our souls up as humans, it's missing. So one tip that I think, for her is interview with someone else, especially when you're first starting, even if they're not on the camera, they're just standing there. And sometimes I'll let someone else interview me and ask me questions, or I'll have a conversation. And also, everything doesn't have to be so planned and canned. Just record your journey. Gary Vee talks about that a lot. Obviously, he's world class at making content, but he just started filming himself doing everything he does. And of course, yes, he spends a lot of money on a content team that follows him around with a camera, but that can be as easy as a little tripod with your iPhone and you just hitting record. And you never know what you're going to get out of that content. You might be talking to someone, you might be thinking about something, and something brilliant comes across that the world needs to see. So I would just say, everyone, like you said, deals with this in some capacity. Even the best content creators still have these thoughts, and don't let that stop you from starting, because you will get better. Just like with writing, your first video is going to suck. Your first LinkedIn post is going to stink. It is going to be I think back at my first ones, and they were graphics with 14 things everywhere and topics that were every topic, let me tell you every single thing I know in one post. And it's just the journey you go on with everything from video to writing to business. You have to start, and that fear is real. So I think that's a great way to kind of start up what is the practical advice, because it doesn't matter what great practical advice you give. If you can't ever get past your fear of starting, it doesn't matter how much you know. There are a lot of people that know so much about content creation and never create content because they're too scared.
It's such a beautiful segue. It just dovetails perfectly with what I was wanting to share about, specifically about the book writing process and how to actually leverage the process to create excitement, bring people in to your process. A lot of the authors that I work with will do a lot of behind the scenes. They'll bring their audience in with them, whether it's their email list or their LinkedIn audience, usually both. They'll share, thoughts from the writing process. They'll share that they secured an editor. They'll share the covers that they're choosing between. People love that stuff. If you want engagement on a post, you know this, Stephanie, I'm sure, but ask for an opinion. That's like a trick of the trade. Just ask for people's opinion. You will get comments. And so these types of things that people do, not only are they already they're already using that ticket of the book through sharing behind the scenes. They're already claiming authorhood, but they're also building an engaged audience that they're in it with them. They want to be part of it with them. I think that is such a powerful piece. The other thing that I see that works really well for people, I am a big fan of well-invested PR. You're working with a reputable firm who has clear systems and is actually doing what they say they're going to do. It's a tough one to hire because there are no clear deliverables. They can't say, yes, we're going to get you in this publication. For sure, you're going to get these interviews. But a good PR campaign can be like a rocket fuel on your brand if it's done well and if it's executed well. And if you can work with somebody who understands how to integrate the launch of your book with your business and brand, not just to sell the book. Actually, the greatest ROI from writing a book is typically not book sales. It's brand and business growth and doors that are opened. So you need to work with somebody who understands that and understands how to hold both of those things together. It's not just about selling the book. It's about brand awareness and lead generation and all the things that you want as a result of that book launch. So there's so many things we could dive into there, but I love what you said. And I love this idea of, the book writing process is ripe for content. It's ripe for exactly what you said, filming yourself working on your book. I mean, you can go on LinkedIn and say, I just wrote a chapter today about X and here are my thoughts about it. It's just such a rich process for content. And it's really cool because it's like you're in this thing and people love to be in. They love to be in on things with you and follow a story.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point about using content in multiple ways too. And that's something that I think I tell all of my clients. We all have a limited amount of time. We all have a million things going on in our lives and our business. So if you can film a podcast and then use an idea from something you wrote, or either use what you wrote to then say, okay, I know that I got a lot of engagement on this thing when I talked about X. So now I'm going to go film some content on a podcast or on a YouTube video, on some more LinkedIn posts for that. It's the same idea, I think, with the book writing is if you can ask a question 100 times a year and you're the expert, the go-to person about that topic, if someone's asking me every single day, how do you get so many speaking gigs and how did you build your brand? Then I probably should be talking more about that. The world and the audience, it's telling you what they want. If you choose to ignore that and try to go a different direction, you may be missing out on the true north of where you're supposed to be. And especially in that moment, it doesn't mean you can't do something else later and be that person later in that other field. But I think that that's something else to look at is what is your content now showing you and telling you to make future content and then to reuse things. So if you film one video, you can make a lot of short form content from it, figure out what blog posts you're going to write from it. And then, like you said, all of that can come from your original idea from your book. So I think that that's something people miss. They think everything has to be an original idea. They think every single piece of content they make needs to be something that no one's ever heard them say before. the truth is we like to hear the same thing over and over as humans. We love that affirmation of like, I heard her say that last week and it kind of piqued my interest, but now she just said it again and again and again. And now I'm like, okay, maybe I should go write my book, or maybe I should go make that LinkedIn post. So at the end of the day, it's the same thing with customer facing. We know that in sales, most of the time, an average person sees something over 27 times before they ever purchase it. So how many times have you given up at 3 or 6 or 7 thinking, well, they don't want it, but no, if you had just kept posting for another month, they probably would have maybe looked at it and wanted to buy it. So it's the same thing in sales. I think everything in life is sales in some way. You're selling yourself, you're selling an idea, you're selling a principle, whatever it is in your life, you're always selling it. As a mom, I'm sure you do a lot of selling to your kids, like, hey, we got to do this. I don't have kids, but I have a golden retriever. It's a constant. She's always selling me on something that I always buy. But at the end of the day, it's about that. Is what are you trying to get to? What's your end goal? And what's the easiest way that you can very consistently make content and get your brand out there? If you have something that's a plan that you can do for 1 week and you can only sustain it for 1 week, it's not even worth starting. Figure out what can you do for 1 year? Can you write for 10 minutes a day? Can you do 1 LinkedIn post 3 times a week? Can you make a podcast and break it into 7 short form videos? If you can commit to that for 1 year, then that is a plan that will skyrocket your growth in whatever you're trying to do. If you're not able to do that for a year, you're wasting everybody's time.
That consistency. I mean, what a great loop back to the beginning of our conversation. Consistency is everything. It reminds me of growing up, my dad actually made this for him because it was a quote that he really loved, but he had in his chiropractic office an Aristotle quote that says, excellence then is not an act, but a habit. And I have some issues with Aristotle in general. He has some questionable philosophies, but I love that quote because it is really about our habits. It's about our consistency. It's about showing up. It's about getting that butt in the chair. It's about like that following through. And there are going to be periods where it's harder or you lose some consistency. So the more you can reduce that, like the way I've been thinking about this recently, that feels very true to me, is that when I don't show up for my goals that I know are really important to me, it erodes my self-trust. Yeah. And then eroding self-trust builds up shame, right? And a sense of less than. And so can we just like abolish that and just say, okay, today is a day. Today is a new day. And who cares what I didn't do before? Today is the day that I can make a different decision and I can rebuild that self-trust and I can move forward in consistency. And maybe I will hit some bumps down the road, but I'm going to approach those with a sense of grace and also still a commitment, because when we hit those bumps and we fall off some of that consistency, it just deepens and deepens and deepens, sometimes for years. And I would love to see us start to be gentler with ourselves in those moments and be able to just pick things back up when it aligns and move back in to working toward our dreams and our goals. I think that would be just a beautiful space to live into.
I have a coach that I like. He says that the clock goes to 0 every night. And I think that can be used to make you hungry also. So, hey, what I did today, if I killed it today, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have to kill it tomorrow in a good or a bad way. You can take a break, you can come back, but you also got to know like what you did 6 months ago is not probably going to continue to feed you every single day now either. So like with lead gen and things like that, like you got to keep going with things. And so that's a powerful thing to know on both sides of it, is like what you're doing and what you're focusing on every day. It matters in the scheme of so much in your life, but it doesn't always show up. It's a lagging indicator. So it doesn't show up today, what you do today. It's about 6 months, a year, 10 years from now that you're like, wow, those days that I spent doing that hard thing that I thought I wasn't making any progress, now they've all of a sudden come to this beautiful point where I'm like, wow, all that stuff back then is now why this is happening now. And that's really hard to see when you're going through tough times. But I think that's the way that you should think of things, is what I'm doing right now is laying a foundation. It's building a runway for for this giant plane that I want to take off in my life. And you can start that now and start paving, and you continue to go longer, and you can build a bigger plane and take off a bigger plane on that runway. So depending on what your goals are in life and how much you want to achieve and how big your dreams are, you can do that. You just got to know you got to give yourself grace and time to go make that happen. It's going to take a lot of hard work.
Oh, I love that so much. I was like, I'm wanting the little heart emoji that you can click in Zoom to like pop up on the screen. It's just a beautiful, I think that's just such a beautiful message to wrap up this whole conversation. And that is very inspiring. Beautifully said, Stephanie.
Thank you. Well, I am so glad we got to have this conversation, and hopefully one day soon I'm going to get to come see you in Portugal, because that is on my bucket list of places for sure. And I'm sure I'll be calling you about the book, because now you've inspired me to get back in the groove. If someone is interested in working with you, I know that you have an amazing website, you post newsletters, you have LinkedIn content. So is the best place to find you your website?
Yeah, you can find me at stacyennis.com. I do have if I do say so myself, a really great newsletter. People tell me all the time that they like look forward to reading it, and I really put my heart into it. I'm also really active on Instagram, on LinkedIn at Stacy Ennis, on both platforms. And I love hearing from people. So I get replies from readers all the time. I get DMs. If you listen to this episode with Stephanie, just reach out, say hi. I'd love to hear from you. If you have a book that you are dreaming about, tell me about that too.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Stacy. And we will be back with another episode next week of the Grit Blueprint podcast. Thank you for listening.